Hi all, and welcome to the first episode of Forearmed. I'm your host, the S2. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the Australian Nationals, list creation that went ahead for that, including the constraints placed upon that tournament, the Nationals winners list as well, and a few other tier lists, including those from the top three. But we'll also go for a bit of a deep dive into the actual other lists as well, and what I actually thought was probably maybe some of the toughest lists that were there. And again, some of the lists that were matched up in the games I played on my way to eventually gaining top spot in this tournament. And my thoughts in regards to this tournament as well, and musings of, I guess, what you would call a national champion. My plan is to use this channel going forward to help others, and not just others in general, but also the community itself, especially for those who served, who I am one of those, and the constraints that, some of these things that do get placed upon us, not just for service reasons either, but also for the fact that it's an out for us, and it's a willing way for us to get out into the community, and I guess for some of us also cope with PTSD. So let's have a look and get into it. So once again, welcome to the first episode. So let's first talk about the Australian Nationals. Australian Nationals this year was held in Brisbane as part of the BrisCon Expo. This tournament was sponsored by quite a few people this year, Battlefront no less, as it was a Nationals event. So a big shout out to them, as they did put up a lot of the prize pool for this, and this was one of the biggest prize pools, I believe, in Australia in terms of prizes. It was close to $1,000 Australian, so that's quite a lot for prize support for a single tournament in Australia. Generally, you probably get maybe a fifth of that, if not quite significantly less. Another one was Aetherworks, so big shout out to them as well for doing a lot of the beautiful trophies that we all received in the end, and also for the TOs and the other events organisers for the day. So that's a big shout out for them, because they do a lot of hard work behind the scenes for this area, and not to mention just the community in general. So as I stated, the community is a big thing for the area, so we must always recognise those who put in the effort to make sure we can actually still have fun and play games at the end of the day. As for the tournament itself, so the tournament was structured over the 2 days. So it was 5 games, 3 on the Saturday, 2 on the Sunday. List creation itself was quite interesting in that you were restricted on the actual formations, so you were only allowed to have 3 formations maximum. None of those formations could be duplicates, and the other restriction was that it had to be the same nation, so you couldn't use allies. So that in itself was pretty big. So there was no, T-55 Czechs with BTR Soviets, where you could min-max for a huge horde. A bit like the old East German lists of the gone by V1 era of Team Yankee. Alright, onto the lists. So, starting off, I'll run through my list, which was a Dutch list. So the tournament itself was 100 points. The constraints on the list builds were the fact that you could have maximum 3 formations, 1 nation only, so 1 book, or in regards to that, I guess, 1 force you could choose from within nations. So if you had 3 nations, which I chose, the choice was the Dutch, but I couldn't take any allies with that, so I couldn't use any West Germans or anything else. So that was one of the biggest things to take away from this tournament, was you could only use 1 nation, max 3 formations, and no formation could be duplicated as well. So that does place a few minor constraints on the list build itself, but at the end of the day, I had to think about what I actually wanted to use. So first of all, I chose to go with 2 formations. One was a Leopard 2 formation, and the other one was a YPR mechanized infantry formation. So when I planned this list, I planned it so I could take all three stances, especially with the extended missions being used at the tournament. And the reason, I guess, I choose my lists is to make sure that I at least have either one, or if max, 2 units that have to be held in reserves. And I guess this comes down to another thing as well. It's like, when choosing your list, you do have to have reserves in the background, and just understand that you need to know what you want to put in reserve first. And I think that's probably the biggest thing going into building a list, is knowing what to put into reserve first. And then probably maybe build your list around that. So that's the mindset I had for this game, and for this tournament as well. So my reserves would be my Leopard 2 HQ and my platoon of 3 Leopards. 40 points, bang. That's my reserves done. And then from there, I had to fill out the rest of the formation for the Leopard 2s. So that was with a minimum strength unit of mech infantry, 4 765 anti-tanks with the TOW 1s, a unit of PRTL, I guess pseudo Gepards as I like to call them for the Dutch, and then also the Reese unit as well, which is the 113 CNV. So that rounded out that side of the formation to 61 points. So that was my formation, which still left me around about 39 points in total to use. So in that regard, I rounded out the rest of the list with a mech formation, which was HQ, 2 min-strength units of mech infantry, another unit of AT TOW 1s in regards to the YPRs, another unit of PRTL, sorry, and some mortars, because I think every list you need to at least have some form of artillery, and I guess with the 120mm mortars they do offer some really great benefits for what they are. You get smoke, yes it's a small template, it's not the best of templates when you consider it against some salvo weapons like the Lars system out there for the West Germans. However, I think in regards to what it can offer is the fact that it's, 84, I believe, with firepower 4 plus. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's quite decent for what you get, where it can actually hurt light-skinned armoured vehicles from the top. But the main use for it is to pin that infantry, and also to dig them out of their trenches, so to speak, or their foxholes, especially with their high firepower. And if you manage to get that repeat, then yeah, it's really going to start hurting those infantry formations. So yeah, just in summary, I guess mortars are quite cheap and effective, especially coming in at like 3 points for the unit. So I really like that factor when it comes to it, that they are quite cheap. So great little unit for decent amount of firepower, and great for tactical flexibility. Rounding out support, I guess, within the list was an OP, so that way I did get my +1 for ranging in, just due to the fact that Dutch are 4+ for the skill. So it's not like the rest of the NATO forces where they are, if you're out in the open, you are going to range in on a 2+, or if terrain, you will range in on a 3+. So Dutch, they're very much like the Americans. They do struggle with ranging in unless you do have an OP. And last but not least, another unit of PRTLs. So that gave me, I guess, 9 pseudo Gepards. Now, most people would look at that and go, that's overkill. But at the end of the day, it makes up for a lot of the list. Like, that's 18 points in AA. However, that's 18 points in AA that's dual roll. So that's one of the things I love about SPAGs, or self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. And it's one of the things I like about West Germans as well, is they do have Gepards. However, Dutch, you only pay 6 points for 3, unlike the Germans who pay 3 for 8. So you do get a discount, but you lose out in skill and probably most likely morale also. However, the fact that you can take 9 of them for 18 points is quite cheap and quite really great within that list. So this list rounds out quite well in regards to flexibility of firepower, and especially considering when what I actually have on the board out of the 14 units is 12 units on the board from the get-go. Regardless of what stance I choose, I've actually got all 14 units to play around with, and because I'm only reserving my headquarters and my Leopard platoon out of that 40 points of 100 points for reserves, it gives me a lot more on the field. And gives me a lot more flexibility, and it does, I guess, sort of enter that realm of psychological warfare in regards to your opponent, going, how do I deal with all that? Especially if you are playing a more elite force, where you don't have that much, where you only have maybe maximum 10 units as your force. So there are a few lists in here which I'll go into later. One of those is the West German force that I versed, where, you know, its unit count was 9 in total. But yeah, it's like, when you think about it like that, it's like 9 versus 14. I'm already outnumbering you. So, but that's not to be taken into consideration. It's like, yes, on paper versus what you see in reality is two different things. And I think that's another thing we need to discuss later on, which we'll go through in our channel. So that overall is my list. So it was 5 games spread over 2 days, 3 on the Saturday, 2 on the Sunday. Alright, moving on. So let's talk about the 5 games that I played, and also the stances. So hand in hand with the list was making sure that I couldn't use all 3 stances. Now this is big. So having a list that gave me not just large amounts of troops on the board, but also the ability to go, hey, maybe I need to defend. Maybe I need to choose a maneuver against a more mechanized force that'll give us either different missions in regards to that, or, you know, maybe I just need to go straight for the attack and I need everything on the board because I'm up against something that I just feel, if I have them in reserves, I'm not going to be able to hold objectives. And that's probably a big one. And we'll talk about that, especially I think it was Game 4. And Game 4 was against a BTR Horde. And yeah, so that player was last year's winner for the Nationals last year. So versing that force again this year, I had to have a mindset, because they took the same force from last year because, hey, why not fix something that isn't broken, right? So we'll move into that later on. But yeah, so the games I played was against 2 Iranian forces, the West German force twice because it needed to be a decider factor to see who would actually win the championships, and the Soviet force, who won last year as well. But yeah, so that was the 5 games I ended up playing. So first game was against a Iranian force. Now, Iranians, they are quite flexible. They do get a lot of stuff, especially infantry. You got to watch out for that Baji. Baji, just hordes, cheap hordes. And it's like, if you thought BTR hordes were cheap, no. Like Baji hordes, like a infantry company with over like 30 stands for 20 points. You know, that is massive, especially if you see that coming across the board. And it's like, if you don't have the firepower to take that down, it's going to be up in your face pretty quick, and that's pretty harsh. But I think that was game 2. I'll see if I can find game 1's list. Alright, so game 1 was against a Iranian force with 3 companies. So it was a mech company, a T-62 company, a chieftain company, supported by quite a bit. So in total, it was very, very numerous on the table. So yeah, it was quite a scary force. Reserves for this list were the Chieftain Tank Company. So at least I didn't have to face them off the front straight away, but still, it's quite scary facing them. Especially just for the pure fact of what they are. It's like, they're cheap, they're like British chieftains in the end, but they don't have the firepower, but they still have that nasty gun. And it's one thing to watch out for, especially if you are going to get against them, especially numerous amounts of them. And this is what it was. It's like, when you think about it, you're versing 11 chieftains for, 37 points. Brits, you're paying quite a premium for them. Like 37 points for 11 chieftains, where it's like you're paying 36 for 6. So yeah, chieftains are quite the little power packer for the Iranians. The rest of the list was made up of another tank company, which is the 262s, which also had 11 T62s. Now, these are nothing to be scoffed at either, especially just think about it. It's like here I am with 4 Leopard 2s versus close to 22 tanks. You know, it's quite daunting when you think about that, especially trying to get through that overwhelming area. Followed up by 3 mechanized platoons on top of that mech company. So, and then 4 Cobras. So I wasn't too worried about the Cobras, just for the pure fact that I did have 9 pseudo-gepards. And that would have definitely handled it. However, it's like, 22 tanks versus 4. It's not the best odds. So that game was quite tight. I think I ended up going 7-2 in that game. And I think that just came down to the fact that I managed to get to the objective mostly prior to the chieftains coming on. And I think it was more the fact that I think it was one of the missions I played, I think it was Outflank. I can't remember off the top of my head which missions we played, but I ended up spearheading 2 units out. And that just not only gave me a bit of a push, but just allowed me to hit both flanks. And from there, I was able to just focus fire on each tank as it came through. And then try to make sure that when the reserves did come on, I was fair enough away. And I think that's one of the things I like about the pseudo-gepards with the PRTLs, is they are 80-11, they are firepower 4+. But it's the amount of shots. They're 5 stationary and 4 moving. So that's scary. That's a lot of firepower. So that's 45 shots stationary, 4 or 9, and then, quite a few less. So, but still, that's a lot of firepower. And the good thing about them was trying to get them onto flanks. And that's basically what I tried to do, was get my pseudo-gepards on the flanks of these tanks, where they could support my infantry, who were only armed, when you look at it, with really cargo stuffs and 66s. So if I'm facing West Germans, which I did face, it was a slog, because if they have anything that's, either Showboom or ERA, Dutch struggle, and they struggle hard, and it's like, you can't really hurt things that have that, especially with a list where your AT doesn't really punch through that armor, especially with the capability of saying, hey, look, my armor's now 16 front and rear or side, and it's like, wow, I can't hurt that. And it's like, the best I can do is hit it with a Charlie Gustav and pray for a 1, just a value, and then hopefully, push you off an objective or something like that. So yeah, so that was the Iranian force I versed, and when I look at it, it's like, it's a great list. It's a good list, very comfortable, great to play with. It's probably one of the lists I would not want to verse again with Dutch, given more time. So yeah, that's that game. So that's game 1. So that was 7-2. Next game, yep, up against another Iranian force. Yeah, what can I say? It's like 2 Iranian games straight up on day 1. It's not looking good. It's quite the slog. Horde armies are not the best to verse, because it's like, you'll notice that when you do verse Horde armies, it's one of those things where you do get stuck for time. And it's like, if you can't reach the objective, you just, and that's what can actually happen in your tournament, especially if you're trying to aim for that top spot. Is you got to be prepared to say, hey, look, I'm going to take a hit on this one. Best I can do is maybe a 6-3, if possible. Just the pure fact that if I have to get to the objective, I've got to accept losses. And it's like, there's no point going, yay, I'm going to get an 8-1. Don't. Never ever look at going for 8-1. Always look at going possible 6-3, because a win at the end of the day is a win. So this Iranian list, very similar to the one previously. The only difference, and the big difference, was a large unit of Baji. So very, very large unit of Baji with a lot of RPGs. So yeah, a large unit of Baji. Now, this game I ended up going 8-1. Now, when I say I went 8-1, it was more along the lines of the dice gods were happy with me, and it was pure luck. Once again, I think it was the mission Outflank. Still can't remember off the top of my head what mission, but I know if I find it, I'll put up the missions for each of these at the end of the video, so you know what missions were played. So, deployment-wise was very similar to the first game. I pushed out in flanks with my 2 units of recon, just to get more board coverage. However, that large unit of Bargy also decided to spearhead. So, watching my opponent deploy 37 stands of infantry in spearhead was quite daunting. Yes, they have a 4+ save. However, the terrain on the actual board that we're playing on was urban. So, once those Bargy got into the buildings, it's firepower test to remove them. So that was tricky as well. So it took me about 4 turns to remove that Bargy infantry company, and that was just focus firing everything I had on it. At the same time, trying to remove 11 T-62s. And a lot of the other things that were going up and around, and including the chieftains that were also there as well. As my opponent decided, you know what, I'm going to reserve my frog foot, because he had frogs. So there's 14 points straight up, and then, you know, some more chieftains. But he still had a couple of chieftains on the board, and the rest of the units. So that was quite daunting to get through as well. So unfortunately, I guess it came down to the dice guards, and just because of the mission we were playing on, I remember that reserves were... My reserves come on automatically. He has to wait till turn 3 to start getting his reserves. Unfortunately, by turn 5, it was called. I was managed to get the objective, and I was able to wipe out most of my opponent's list before any of his reserves arrived. Now, that was just pure luck. I guess it also came down to the force as well. Both of us chose attack for that mission as well. So, no, that was the same with the other one. Both of us chose attack. So, you know, 2 armoured forces, you have to choose attack. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to try and choose defend, maybe slow him up with minefields. But that large unit of Bargy, they're not going to care about minefields. Iranians, they're not going to care about minefields, especially if they're just going to sit there. It's like, and that's what I was saying. At the end of the day, you've got to figure out what you really need to do. You know, do you want to go for time and get that mutual loss and just, you know, call it a draw at the end of the day? Or do you want to accept losses and try to push for the win and go for that 6-3? Which is a lot better, especially when you think about it from a tournament perspective, especially with the Nationals, where the overall winner is decided by wins, not points. And points are only used as a deciding factor depending on how many people have won. So if you get everybody there who've won their 5 games throughout the day, and you get another person with 5 games, but they've won more points, then that's the deciding factor, which happened last year. And that was a big factor in that last year as well. So that was game 2. So that was against the Iranians, and that was a good game. Really enjoyed it, but it was just unlucky for my opponent. So yeah. Game 3. Now, Game 3 was against the West Germans. Now, yes, this is what I was saying before about my list in regards to the fact that if I come up against the force that was quite heavy in regards to Chobham, I would struggle. And I did. This was against the West German Marder 2 list. So, the list itself was 2 units of Marder 2s, both with a cargo staff and 50mm upgrades across the board for all their Marder 2s. Now, that in itself is scary. So you're looking at something that's quick, it's dangerous, it's moving capable, 18 inches, threatened range of about 36 with an AT-13 firepower 4+ gun. Quite a scary list. And then coupled with that, you've got 4 Leopard 2s and 4 Leopard 1s rounding out the list with Gepards and a couple of Lukes and a Panzermorse. As I said, the mortars are just cheap, effective, great artillery units, especially for the point scores for 120s. So yeah, that list was quite scary to face. I remember the game going back and forth quite a bit, especially considering that I had to wait or try to get flank shots to really get rid of those minor 2s. And the only thing that was really threatening those minor 2s was my toe 1s. But even then, he's still getting a save. And then on top of that, he's throwing more dice back at me with those minor 2s, which is also quite scary. Biggest factor for that was him destroying most of my PRTL units, which I had to either use to plug holes, because if I didn't, it would have been game over quite quickly, because he threatened quite early with his Leopard 2s. My Leopard 2s were coming on for reserves, and I had to get basically a Hail Mary for my Leopard to come up on the hill from my board edge, where I was just lucky enough for him to fail the roll with his Leopards to win that game 6-3. And that was a very tough game. Very tough. Great opponent. Very well placed with their list. I believe they were also in the top 3. However, that is one list I do not want to face, and that's minor 2s. Especially with Dutch. It's just a bad matchup to begin with. Just like, where I had to wait till my reserves come on to at least try to push his list back. But even then, it's like minor 2s punching out side armor of Leopard 2s at 8 versus 13. It's not the best. I'm looking for 6s against a lot of dice. So I had to play very smart, throw things, and just basically try to push and keep hold of my objectives most of the time. But yeah, the moment I got my Leopard 2s on the board, that was a game changer. Once his Leopard 2s were gone, then I could focus fire and trying to push forward with my Leopard 2s and threaten. But yeah, so that was a very tough game. So 6-3 there. So that put me on 3 wins for the day. And then, of course, that put me up against the Soviet BTR Horde list for the next day, for the Sunday. So, yeah, BTR Horde list. It is what it is. It's a medium strength, 3 units of BTRs, each with 2 spigots and a gremlin, all upgraded with the RPGs. Rounded out by 5 T80s. And some Shriekers and Golfers. And that's the list. That's 100 points bang on. He's got his reserves, which is the 5 T80s, which is bang on 40 points. It's very similar to my list in the fact that I've got 1 unit plus my HQ as reserves. So it's scary in that there's a lot on the board that can hurt me straight away. And that's a mass amounts of infantry to get through. Now, when I went up against this list, I did in the back mind of what I was thinking of. Now, the terrain was a desert table. It was not the best. It was very open, not much cover, and plenty of open space for those BTRs and infantry to just rush down the board, get into my face, and then push me off objectives through massed assaults very early on. So I was thinking defend, which would give me 4 mine templates, depending on the mission. However, if I was to get a mission where it was less favourable, I would still be defending with deep reserves and scattered with my Leopard 2s. So I naturally chose attack just on that. Just for the pure fact that I was looking at that list going, that is a bit concerning, so that's why I chose attack. That ended up being a mutual loss for both of us with 3-3, so that was basically a draw because we ran out of time. So that game was very scary. I faced 6 turns of T80s trying to push me off an objective. I just kept throwing units at it to basically try and contest that objective every single turn, hoping for my Leopard 2s to show up and actually do something, which they eventually did. But by the time that happened, it was too late, and I just tried to keep pushing his infantry off the objective with my Leopard 2s once I got them there. Again, pulling them back after the assault just so I didn't have to worry about those RPGs going for side armor. Yes, they're 18-19. However, when you only have a limited number of units trying to push on an objective, and 4 of those are Leopard 2s, facing off against quite a large amounts of RPG teams, it's very daunting, especially if they're going to get flank shots. So yeah, and that was one of the biggest things, is if I'm going to assault them, I've got to assault them smart. I've got to pin them so I don't have to worry about, really getting hit too hard from them. So that was that game. And the last game was against the West German player again, which was also scary. That went down to the wire as well. Very much like trying to outmaneuver each other. Eventually, I managed to get up onto one of his flanks and then try to push the objective. It was a last-ditch attempt by some of my infantry to assault his Leopard 2s, and he failed his counter-assault and was pushed back off the objective. Now, that was a lucky turn of events for me, and that ended up being 6-3. And that was my 5 games at the Australian Nationals, which gave me 4 wins and a mutual loss/draw, which put me at the top for the tournament. So I was lucky enough to get first place, if you think about it, against some really great opponents and some really great lists. But if we dive deeper into it, it's like, that's just some of the lists I missed. Some of the other lists which I'll put up now are very, very scary indeed. And this is the thing, it's like, going to a Nationals event, you've got to really think about the lists you face, what you actually want to do, and prep and plan beforehand. Because if you don't go in with an idea of what you want to do, it's going to turn pear-shaped very quickly for you. And some of these players have been playing for quite some time. They know the game very well, and they've come up with some very, very, very tough lists. So this is one of the lists. It was a Soviet list, and just looking at it, it was a BTR 60 motor infantry with a T-55 battalion, and it's supported by T-80s and a lot of T-55s, and those T-55s also had Stabers, so that's a big take for me. It's like, that's a lot of, AT on the board, and especially for those T-55s, it's like, you could concentrate on those T-80s and they can just sit there in the middle of the board, and you're going to get outflanked by those T-55s, and that's going to be a scary day. And then of course you got the Nonas, because just prior to this tournament, Red Dawn came out, so guess who came out in force that day? The Afghansi VDV, of course, naturally. So yeah, so there were some really interesting lists for the day, and some very, very hard lists to face. So that was another list I really did not want to face, which was that Soviet list. But yeah, again, another one here, the British list. As you can see, mech backed up by medium research strikers and challengers for reserves with tracked rapiers and marksmen. It's like, brilliant British list. Plenty of firepower, plenty of give and take. It also covers that whole factor of, like, what I was saying to before about reserves. 1 to 2 units in reserves. Everything else is on the board, which is also scary. So it's like Harriers and Challengers offers pretty much an easy one to make, and everything else comes on. And it's like, that's another list. I'm glad I didn't face that list, because that would have been quite the interesting run. This list, another British list, this is also the winner of Best Painted. Now, I will put up photos of that. It is an actual beautiful painted force of Berlin Brigade. Like, as I said, it's like, things at Nationals events are really great, because 1, you verse some really great lists, but 2, some really great painted lists. So yeah, that was some real good stuff coming out of there. So this was very similar to the other British list, minus the Reese units, but still, it was a chieftain force. They are still good units. Like, you get 8 chieftains, but play them right, and it's like, they can go a long way. They're just great list to play. Another West German list. This one with Leopard 205s, with Martyrs, and Martyr 2s again. So this was a freaking scary list. I think its downfall with this list was probably taking like extra tornadoes, where you could have taken like some AA. I think for this list, but apart from that, it's scary. It's got a lot of Martyr 2s. So yeah, 10 Martyr 2s, all pretty much just about upgraded, along with 2 A5s. They're the biggest, beefiest, nastiest tank you can think of next to the M1A1 out there. Like, apart from the M1A1 with its gun of AT-23, the Leopard 2A5 just sniffs at it and goes, yeah, whatever, bro. Come at me front on and watch me just bounce you. But yeah, again, decent list. Scary to face with my Dutch. I'm glad I didn't verse it, just for the pure fact that everything in that list, apart from the Jags and the Tornadoes, was Joba. And the side armor of those Leopard 2s is 13. So, in retrospect, that list would have been very difficult for my Dutch to face. Just on that pure fact that I had really nothing to hurt that list except for my Leopard 2s on the flanks. So, that would have been a really tough game for me to face. I'm glad I didn't play that list. Another West German force. This one was a Leopard 1 company. I really love Leopard 1s, especially with Canadians and Anzacs. You pay the extra point for them for a unit of 4 over the West Germans, but they come with brutal. That says enough as it is, especially with their skill. The ability to move 10 inches, still have a rate of fire of 2, 3+ skill just to get you that extra 4 inches, and then fire potentially 8 shots at something, especially if it's infantry. In vehicles or infantry in general, and just go, hey, look, I'm going to make it. You just re-roll those saves if I hit you, which is great. Good list overall. Again, he also decided to throw in some Leopard 2A5s as well, and some Martyr 2 Panzer Grenadiers. So this list was not just, a couple of Leopard 1s, but also Leopard 2s backing them up with the A5s. So that's another list. I hate West Germans with versing with Dutch, just for the pure fact that it's like bad matchups, especially against Joba. Really bad matchups. As I said before, it's like this was Red Dawn, so we did actually get a lovely VDV list, which was painted up. Great list. I really like the VDV Afghansi, just for the pure fact that it's a Soviet force that's very NATO. So when you look at it, it's like, hey, if you're a NATO player and you want to play a Soviet list or a Warpack list, I think VDV is one of those lists where you do get the skill, you do get to hit on, like most NATO armies in the game. And I think that in itself is probably one of the great benefits of the Soviet VDV lists. That those who are wanting to have a go at Soviets or Warpact can actually play a list that's very similar to what they already know. So it's just transferring skills across. So yeah, that's another great list. Well painted as well. One of the things I love about Nationals, as I said before. Another list we got was the Anzac list. As I said, it's like Aussies are very good. This one, packs heaps of Milans, packs heaps of Leopards, especially those brutal Leopards. And again with the, and then some 109s and Rapiers as well with the Red Eyes. So this is a pretty much stock standard list for a pure Anzac list. And again, it's like, I would have struggled just for the pure fact it's like there's a lot of mech infantry in there and a lot of Milans, so it's like that mitigates my mobility with any of my units straight away. And he's already, if I need to assault him, he's better at me and he's also got the skill over my Dutch. So that's one list I'm glad I didn't get to face. Also, Israelis, you don't see many people play Israelis, I think, because people find that they're not competitive. I think that's wrong. Israelis are competitive. I think it just requires someone with a bit of patience to play them. And this list, I know the player quite well, and they do play a really good Israeli list. I think it's just sometimes they just get really bad matchups. And it's a great list. Like, it has everything you want in an Israeli list. Mac 1s, great little unit. They're like Chieftains. Yeah, they lack the AT, but they've got the rate of fire and the maneuverability to do so. So, yep, hands to him for this, for playing Israelis, because they're a great list. I really like Israelis. I'm actually hoping if they redo Oil Wars 2, give that upgrade for the Mac 3s with that 120, and maybe I will take those out for a test drive. Another British force. This one was very scary in regards to bulk Milans, and then also Roam challenges. So good defensive list with some real punch in regards to it. So one of the lists I really hate facing is British Milan spam, and this is British Milan spam at its best. So glad I did not face that. Our other Dutch player, very similar list to what I took. The only difference is he didn't take that second formation of Leopard 2s, so he decided extra infantry and bumped them up to max strengths. But great list nonetheless. Pretty much stock standard, similar to list of mine. But yeah, what can I say? Dutch are great. Iraqis, another great one from Oil Wars is Iraqis, very similar to Iranians. Only difference is they get a little bit more extra fun in the fact that they could take quite a few more helicopters, which this one did. So he had a T-72 company and bulk Heinz, followed up by bulk everything else. Great list, glad I didn't get to face it, but I wish it did, because that would have probably been a really great match. One of the only American lists to be there, and this list was very interesting. 3 companies, and it was Marines. It was purely tailored to be a Marine list. It was a great list, really well painted as well. Great list to see. And if you have a look at it, it's a surprise that this list didn't do as well as what you'd see on paper. And this is what I was saying to you before. On paper, things look better than what they are. Now, nothing against the person in general, but I think that this list is a great list, and it's a shame. And I think it may have just come down to some really bad dice rolls and bad matchups in regards to opponents. And again, this also comes down to those choices. It's like, those stance choices are big. Like, when you look at this, it's a great defensive list. Everything's on the board. There's plenty of toes, especially toe 2s for big tanks. Like, you're looking at what? 12 toe 2s. That's nasty. Straight up. And 4 of those are hammerhead, so it's like they're hard to shift. So, yeah, great list. I'm just surprised it didn't do as well as what I thought it was. But yeah, I'd love to give this list a go myself, to be honest. It's a really nice list. And our last list, another VDV list. Again, another well-painted list, and as I said, it's VDV. It's like, if you like playing NATO, then this list is for you. It's a really good list. And this list was really well done too, like, really well. Heinz, Storms, for sport, with a large T-55 tank company with, missile upgrades. So, good units in general, and beefy. So, that runs out the lists for Australian Nationals and my thoughts on those lists. I really liked Australian Nationals this year, and I look forward to playing it again next year. I really don't know what to play next year in regards to terms of nations, because you do have, a couple of new books like Nordic and Free Nations coming to, or NATO as they like to calling it, coming out towards the end of the year. If you haven't seen that, go check out the Christmas spoiler from Battlefront. It should tell you everything about that. In regards to what's coming out in the future, you always see it every year at Christmas. Go watch the video. It's great. And there's also a couple of others from, Modelling from Advantage as well, and from Fog of War as well. A couple of other channels out there that are really great at, finding out some tidbits in regards to future releases. So do check them out as well. Great people as well. So that just rounds up episode 1. So hopefully in episode 2 we'll talk more about list selection in regards to the stances, and maybe a bit more in regards to how to go about creating a list for a tournament. So hopefully you've enjoyed, our chat in regards to the Australian Nationals and the lists that were there, and how I went about creating the list. And we'll hopefully see you in the future. So once again, thank you. If you like this video and would like to see more content, please like and subscribe and support the channel. And I wish you all the best. And remember, good hunting out there. Cheers.